Once upon a time, in the far distant past of 2 or 3 weeks ago, the internet was awash in watercolor skies and rosy cheeked characters straight out of a Studio Ghibli film. Only, they were all just AI generated images conjured up by OpenAI's newly upgraded Dalle model inside the ChatGPT interface. It all followed one simple command: make me look like I belong in a Studio Ghibli movie, and then poof, magic. Suddenly, grandparents were being spirited away, dogs were being transformed into soot sprites, and everyone's wedding photos got run through a filter that made them look like a lost piece of concept art from Howl's Moving Castle. Sam Altman, the guy who heads up OpenAI and spends every day on a podcast, well, he's apparently a low-key anime fan, even changing his profile picture to a Ghibli-style drawing of himself. It was cute, funny, and kind of exploded overnight, but for all of those warm fuzzies, what most people didn't notice in their rush to Ghiblify their lives was this. Something important had quietly changed in OpenAI's policies, and it might just reshape the relationship OpenAI has with artists for the worse. See, once upon an earlier version of ChatGPT 4, OpenAI's image model refused to generate images in the style of living artists. This wasn't just about corporate squeamishness, it was a decision rooted in ethics, copyright sensitivity, and, reality. Artists weren't happy about their works being taken and reprocessed by AI. It was definitely creating a bit of a pain point in OpenAI's public optics, so for a lot of folks, the how or why this data was obtained didn't matter. But for artists, it really did, and they were not shy about sounding the alarm. If OpenAI didn't ask for permission, they shouldn't be using it. That is the stance of the art community, and a sentiment I do generally agree with. To some extent, the companies seemed to agree, implementing a rule that living artists wouldn't be touched, and that included the studios they created, inspired, and worked for. Instead of honoring the spirit of the original artist protection rule, OpenAI has sidestepped it entirely. They do this now by claiming that it's not emulating an individual, it's emulating a studio. Never mind that Ghibli's entire visual identity was birthed from one man's mind, or that, he named and founded the studio, or that we have words to describe when an artist becomes synonymous with a studio's output. Never mind that studio styles are just legally convenient proxies for the artists behind them. Okay, a rant over, I promise. In practice, this didn't eliminate the problem, it just moved the goalposts, quietly, strategically, and arguably in a two-faced manner. I think it's important that you, the viewer, knows and understands that it was always like this. Topic for another video, I know, but even when this living artist rule included studios, it was easily sidestepped through something we know as the finger-to-hand problem. Getting back to the Ghibli thing, whether OpenAI intended it or not, they've now unlocked a feature that effectively allows style laundering, a way to generate, distribute, and potentially profit from recognizable art styles without needing to say whose style it really is. It's a loophole, a big, beautiful, Miyazaki-shaped loophole. OpenAI didn't launch this feature with a splashy press release saying, now you too can borrow Miyazaki's style with reckless abandon. No, what happened here was quieter, more like a chess move than a marketing campaign. In the system documentation for GPT-4o, OpenAI slipped in a line that reads like nothing at first glance. It says the model now refuses requests for images in a style of a living artist. That seems fair. Artist protection, copyright respect, and nothing to see here. Nothing new, at least, that we haven't seen for a year and a half already. But then came the kicker. They also said the model permits broader studio styles. And just like that, a loophole is born. In plain language, that means you can't ask for a painting in the style of Miyazaki, because he's still alive. But you can say, make this look like a Studio Ghibli movie. And because Miyazaki is, let's be real, the studio's entire visual DNA, what you're actually getting is Miyazaki's style with the serial number filed off. It's the kind of legal and ethical sleight of hand that would make even a high-end call girl blush, and it works for every studio out there. You could literally go, I want something from Marvel Studio, a comic that looks like it's from the Silver Age. Dalle will nod and smile, and you and I both know that it's going to show you a generated version of Jack Kirby's art. Before this update, OpenAI's older models would outright reject these kinds of prompts. Free tier users who still had access to those got stonewalled with a cheery little message that said, "We can't generate images in the style of Studio Ghibli due to copyright restrictions." Meanwhile, those who had access to paid subscriptions, they were generating Ghibli-style beach photos, wedding portraits, and anime versions of their cats without restrictions. This wasn't just a change in capability, it was a change in philosophy, where once the company had drawn a bright line around style reproduction, it now offered a new line with just enough blur to make it convenient. The results were immediate. Social media feeds flooded with what looked like, to the untrained eye, an official Studio Ghibli piece of content. People were delighted, inspired, and yes, typically unaware that what they were doing would have been blocked just a couple weeks earlier. OpenAI knows exactly how good its model is at style mimicry. It even boasts that Dalle can now follow detailed instructions with high fidelity to specific aesthetics. So when a user asks for a Ghibli-style version of their backyard barbecue, what they get isn't inspired by, it's indistinguishable from. That's no accident. That's the product working as intended. What's bothering me is what comes after this image generation fad, because each one of those stylized AI-generated images, each dreamy, faux hand-drawn forest scene, it now lives online. It gets posted, reposted, scraped, archived, and you better believe it can be fed right back into the training data for future models. That is the real issue in all of this. OpenAI has effectively opened up a pipeline where imitations beget more imitations, compounding the stylistic footprint of Miyazaki and others like him into future models. Today's Ghibli selfies become tomorrow's dataset, and just like that, the line between inspiration and extraction gets rubbed a little smoother. If you've ever wondered why projections like, in 7 years, 90% of media will be AI generated exist, it's specifically because of these pipelines that big tech really hopes you don't notice through the cute veneer. All of that happens while the original artist has no say in the matter. No consent, no compensation, and no control. If you want to know how artists feel about the sudden flood of AI-made Studio Ghibli lookalikes, we don't have to dig very deep. The reactions range from quietly gutted to outright furious, because beneath the sweetness of the aesthetic, the soft light, the round cheeks, the watercolor haze, there's a sour taste forming in the back of many creators' throats here. It starts off with one question: who gave permission for this? Miyazaki didn't, at least not in any official capacity. The man has gone on record multiple times expressing a deep discomfort bordering on disdain for AI in art. In one now legendary quote, he called an AI-generated animation demo an insult to life itself. That was back in 2016, long before ChatGPT was doodling your dog up as a woodland sprite. He's never really softened his stance on this issue, and I do wonder how things like that might clash with the cultural or spiritual ideas of the region. You know, the ones we see around how inanimate objects, when given enough time or appreciation, can develop a soul of their own. But philosophical meanderings is where meaningful discussion falters in a field that moves as quickly as artificial intelligence. So here we are in 2025, and the studio's signature aesthetic is being used to sell subscriptions. That is what makes this moment so slippery, because the aesthetic of Studio Ghibli is tied to one of the most emotionally resonant visual languages in modern culture. It's gentle, wholesome, nostalgic. It makes people feel things. And so when OpenAI's new tools make it possible to insert yourself into that world, the response isn't always the skepticism we'd usually throw at a tech giant. It is instead delight. People are fascinated, and honestly, I don't have a problem with that. Just like the recycling industry, the consumer is typically not the issue when it comes to AI providers. These giants know what they're doing, and it's part of their strategy that the end user gets blamed for the broader issues that the industry might have. And that's where the soft power of nostalgia becomes a shield. This trend has been widely and understandably praised for how good the art looks. And yes, the images are stunning. There is no argument there. GPT-4o is incredible at mimicking styles. But what's not being said nearly loud enough is why it's good. It's good because it's trained on data that almost certainly included Miyazaki's work. It's good because it had access without consent, without credit, and without consequence. Attribution still isn't a thing OpenAI models are capable of for their native responses. They've managed to sidestep this by offering sources and citations on requests that feed out to a search engine, but that doesn't cut it for the art world. That's the quiet brilliance and subtle danger of this whole thing. OpenAI didn't have to do a hard sell to artists or the public. It just had to let people feel something. The magic that is Miyazaki and Studio Ghibli, well, they did the rest. It's not just art theft. It's art laundering, passed off as fair use, painted over with the gentle glow of childhood wonder, and all of it with the hushed understanding that it will have even greater use in the future. It's tempting to look at all this and say, okay, so a bunch of people got to feel like the main characters in a Studio Ghibli film for a day. What's the harm? And on the surface, sure, it's sweet, it's fun, nobody died, your dog gets to look like he belonged in Kiki's delivery service. I get it. But if you zoom out past the charm, past the memories, past the joy, what you start to see is a long, slow erosion, one quiet prompt at a time, of the boundary between honoring an artist and consuming them. The olive branch OpenAI used to extend to artists is now being used to smack them across the face and say, come on, let's just be friends already. What they've done here isn't just a technical feat, it is a cultural one. By tweaking a single policy line from no living artists to studio styles are okay, they've effectively created a machine that can mass produce what once took decades of mastery and a deeply personal relationship to form. And sure, today that machine is making Ghibli-style portraits of your goldfish. Well, tomorrow it could be generating an entire library of content built from an amalgamum of styles pulled from human artists, many of whom are still alive, still working, and still trying to feed themselves with the very thing that a model can now do in seconds. It's something that the tech and art world have got to find some middle ground on, and while my suggestions, they have not always been popular, it's definitely something that will get worse the longer we put off that 80% solution looking for the 99% one. What's worse is that we're teaching providers that this is content that we are willing to pay for, and it's content that can be used for training data, where every AI-generated Ghibli-like image out there becomes one more data point for the next generation of models to learn from. It is a synthetic layer added to a synthetic feedback loop. What starts as a one-time whim of draw me in a Ghibli style becomes the seed for a future where the model no longer even needs the original Ghibli to exist. It can just learn from its own echoes. So when the studio inevitably tells OpenAI it has to remove anything Ghibli from the visual training data, that won't really matter because it'll have plenty of synthetic images to fall back on for tomorrow. That's not just me being speculative, it is the literal trajectory of AI training pipelines right now. With the looming scarcity of real high-quality training data, companies are already looking for ways to use AI-generated outputs to train newer models. This is called model bootstrapping, and it's being leveraged every day with the intent of making those outputs trained on synthetic data just a little less bad until eventually AI can train AI and improve upon itself. There is something incredibly bitter about this whole thing. Here's a man who spent his life fighting for the sanctity of the hand-drawn, of the slow and the intentional, of storytelling that breathes. His movies are about forests that whisper, machines that ache, and characters that grow because they're allowed to exist in silence. And now, we're feeding that legacy into a machine that works in tokens per second, optimized to minimize latency, and designed to spit out close enough versions of his life's work for $20 a month. In this case, two things can be true at once. I am still a big advocate of AI, but I'm also an advocate for the industry taking it on the chin and just paying people directly on an opt-in basis for their data. It could solve a lot of problems, and the major hurdle here is the unwilling nature of big tech to shoulder the financial burden while profiting off of everything we do with the system. OpenAI didn't accidentally enable this. They moved the goalpost, redefined what counts as protected, and built the tools to ensure the floodgates would open. Maybe they didn't intend to exploit an artist's legacy, but you don't have to mean harm to do it. All you have to do is make it look easy and then look away.